Hello everyone, Leaf Reed here, and we have the Aenied, yes, the last book in this trilogy. Or is it? Well, it's a lot shorter, or, somewhat shorter than the other ones. So what is the big difference here? Well, despite all appearances, this is not written by Homer. This is a completely different author. The kind of Odyssey ended with Homer, and that was kind of it. So this is written by Virgil, and Virgilius Plubius something. What is the big difference here? Well, this is written about 1,000 years later, so that's pretty big difference. Who was Virgil? Virgil was a poet, and it tells you in the book a little bit about him, that he lived in around 100 BC, I want to say, so literally almost at the time of Christ or right before it. And so he wrote a bunch of poetry about nature and society, and apparently about bees. This was the time when the time of Caesar, and Rome was really starting to become, or was at this point, a major power. And apparently the reason Virgil wrote this book is that he meant it as a cultural myth for the Roman people. You know, Rome had essentially amassed this great power, and it's kind of like, okay, we kind of need a little myth to, put tie the bow around it and put the cherry on top. We kind of had the ending of Achilles and the ending of Odysseus, and so this is a story of Aeneas. And Aeneas was one of the sons of the king of Troy, so a brother to Hector. So the story is, it's so funny, it's basically a re-engineering of the entire Odyssey, in that Aeneas, the heir to the Trojan throne, sails all the way after the defeat of Troy to Italy to found the Roman Empire, or the Roman Republic, rather, first, and then comes an empire later. So this is the first time you'll see like an author really kind of rip off or re-engineer a lot of ideas. I think we can give him some leeway because, at that time, the Odyssey is 1,000 years old, so hey, why not? So it really is a combination of these two stories retold from their perspective, and to justify the Roman superiority that they have. The other thing you'll notice about this is that the names of the gods have been Romanized, so you have Jupiter and Juno instead of Zeus and Athena and Hera and the rest of it. The other big difference, of course, is because Virgil is more of a poet in terms of his writing. This is actually meant more so to be read, while the other ones are supposed to be spoken. So this does not have an oral tradition at all. This is supposed to be read. And I think there is a quote from Robert Fagles, the translator of both these novels, which is that Homer makes us listeners while Virgil makes us readers. Like this, very much, a lot of it is copied. For example, Aeneas is sailing towards Italy, and what happens is it starts with him kind of giving a bit of background on the final hours of Troy, what happened to the people there, what were the fates that befell all the main characters and the civilians. And then it jumps forward in time to when he is at this palace, and they're being hosted by the Queen of Carthage, who is called Dido. And so you kind of have the story where Dido, the Queen of Carthage, is, let's just say she has rejected many suitors. She doesn't want anyone, but she sees this brave Aeneas and she wants him. Like, she really wants him, kind of like Calypso. And so Aeneas is like, no, I have to follow my destiny. We have to sail to Italy and basically, fulfill the destiny and take over the land and whatever, as it has been prophesied by the gods. And so again, he has to reject this woman and move on. Dido, after she sees Aeneas and his great ships, fly and escape from her and go off to Italy, she is so stricken with grief of all the people she rejected and the one man she actually wanted leaves her, that she actually commits suicide. And it's this great short tragedy that apparently has been developed. That one part has been developed into entire plays. So, and again, like Aeneas, while he's in this court, he's recounting the stories of his journey there, similar to Odysseus. Aeneas finally, sails away from Dido, and they sail towards Italy, but they end up on Sicily first. And so before they continue the story, they kind of have these festivals and these games. And through happenstance of some ceremony or something, I honestly don't remember all that much, but somehow Aeneas is actually able to kind of go to the underworld with the help of this other person, and they actually are able to talk to his deceased father and talk to him about the destiny and the vision of the great Roman state that will emerge. That is part of his destiny. Throughout this journey, it's Juno, who I think used to be Athena, who had favored Achilles, is now, of course, against Aeneas. And what she'll do is she'll somehow disguise herself and come down and disguise herself as a person. And actually, you see this a lot. I forgot to mention in the Odyssey and in the Iliad, the gods will sometimes come down and they'll disguise themselves as other people. And it's really interesting how they'll, pretend to be just an average person when they're actually a god. They finally get to Italy, and so they meet the native Latins or Etruscans or Tuscans or whatever they were called at the time, but they're called Latins, and it's King Latinus. What transpires is all these soldiers show up on your doorstep, and you're sort of like, oh, okay, hi, how are you? Well, it's like an invading force of people. And so what happens, they exchange, messages, they talk to each other, and they're kind of like, okay, sure, fine, you can have this land and settle here and live here, whatever. But it's a little bit, tensions are kind of high. You have a very well-armed, well-trained force that has arrived on your shores, and you're kind of, a bit intimidated. So what he does is he gives his daughter, Lavinia, to marry Aeneas, to just, smooth everything over. However, one of the native Latin nobles, Turnus, was supposed to be betrothed to Lavinia and was very much still in love with her. So similar to the beginning of the Iliad, a man has taken something that was promised to another man. And so even though the king decrees, look, Turnus, buddy, pal, we need this to happen, but Turnus is hearing none of it. And they're having these festivals and these games, and they're kind of having a good old time until finally they're like, you know what, I'm not okay with this. And basically hostilities break out. And the last bit of the book is this huge string of battles that take place. And, there's parts where Turnus and Aeneas go head to head and they're fighting, and then one of them escapes. And there's a part where Aeneas gets wounded and it's like, oh no, he's dead. But, the hero dies, but he's actually okay. He comes back and he hunts down Turnus. And so they even have this little vignette, which is very vivid in my mind for some reason, but they have this Latin female warrior called Camilla, who is like renowned, throughout her whole tribe and whatever. And she's this great warrior, and she goes into battle, and she's kind of like this female warrior archetype, and she's very valiant and heroic, but eventually she is killed in battle. But it's a big deal, And so that's kind of like a cool little character that they have at the end there. It just kind of comes in. And so finally you're having this huge battle, and it's very, the way it describes this battle is very intense, because it talks about, the forest or the scenery and the homes are on fire. Some of the people and the women in despair are hanging themselves. It's a very very intense scene, and very chaotic. And it reminds me almost like of the ending of a Disney movie when you have all this chaos going on, like real chaos. And what happens is the way the book actually ends is that I think at this point the Latinus, or is dead, and Aeneas chases down Turnus and corners him, and basically says, "All right, like that's enough." And Turnus basically is begging for his life, saying, spare me, and whatever. And Aeneas says, no, and in a fit of rage, he kills him. The end. So it's not exactly a happy ending. It's a very it's not a very nice ending for sure, and it feels bad kind of, because it's not the kind of ending we're used to. The Iliad ends with Achilles forgiving Priam, and even though he's the enemy, or at least the father is main enemy, he shows him forgiveness. In the Odyssey, it's also a bloodbath at the end, but it's kind of justified. These people, harassed his wife for like a decade, and he's able to reunite with his family. It's a good ending. Here, it is just pure vengeance. It is just pure killing and death, and fulfilling the destiny. And in a weird way, you can kind of see how that was the prevailing zeitgeist at the time, where people, obviously liked this, and apparently this was read out loud to Caesar, and Caesar liked it and whatever, and it was appealing to the time. The strong survive, and mercy is not a component of their zeitgeist. And it's very interesting to think about that, because of course what happens very soon is that there's a guy called Jesus who shows up, who preaches the exact opposite: the mercy, compassion, and love. And so it's very interesting how, there's a great struggle and a great story, but it doesn't end on a tone of love or redemption or anything. It's if there was a scene after showing, I don't know, Aeneas burying the dead and showing respect, and maybe, saying that the sacrifice and this chaos was at least worth it so that the great Roman Empire could come from its ashes, and be like, okay, sure, that was, at least justified in some sense. But here it just ends on a note of just, I'm going to kill you. And then, so it's interesting, because this was a very interesting footnote at the end, is that this was still a very popular and well known text among the European nobility, even throughout the medieval ages and the Renaissance. So you think, like, what's the message here? It's like, okay, if you want to take over another country or take over another place and manifest destiny and all that stuff, this is the book. But there's also, the whole Christian perspective, which is, not exactly a non-militaristic perspective, because you have the Crusades and stuff, but it's also like, it's all about forgiveness and social harmony and peace and reflection. And, this is almost like the exact opposite. So to think about the crafting of the Western mind, seems to be, at least from the nobility and the real rulers of the real European powers, seems to be, to me, a duality of Jesus and Aeneas. You have this one merciless warrior who is on a path of destiny, predestined by the gods, and also the peace and enlightenment of Christianity, and of course, during the actual, Renaissance, with the old Greek ideas, and they recirculated back and revitalized those aspects in Christianity and the prevailing culture. So really, really interesting book, kind of exciting, definitely easier to read than the other two, but not quite as memorable, funnily enough, as Homer's stories. It's still pretty good, and this kind of completes the unofficial trilogy of the story of the Greeks and the Trojans. However, it might not be the exact end, because while the story of Aeneas and the Trojans and the Greeks ends with this book very much influences another book that I was very surprised by, and I have an exact page and an exact excerpt that I would like to read for you. This is on page 196, and this is the part where Aeneas has gone to the underworld, or this is the Greek, or rather the Roman underworld, as the Romans understood it. And I'm going to just read you a little bit of this. These are the realms of the monstrous Cerberus. So this is their conception of the afterlife, or the underworld. You have different parts of the underworld guarded by Cerberus. It talks about how the inquisitor and the judge of the souls of the underworld is King Minos. And it finally talks about, the wailing of ghosts and spirits and the lamentations that can be heard from these spirits. It talks about the river Styx and how you have to pay Charon, the ferry of spirits, to cross it without dying yourself. It talks about how, you have corpses who are mutilated and hacked to pieces, yet still live. And it even mentions how Dido, who had committed suicide, now wanders through an endless forest. And finally, we have this passage right here at the bottom of the page. The grisly swamp and its loveless lethal waters bind them fast. Styx, with its 9 huge coils, holds them captive. What other book layers the underworld into 9 different sections and has all these similarities? These few pages right here in this book are basically direct influences and are direct copies for the Divine Comedy. This is, to me, it's fascinating. This is taken directly. When I was reading this, I actually could not believe my eyes. This is almost like direct copyright. In the same way, we were following a thread. In the same way that Virgil has taken and reinvented the Iliad and the Odyssey into from a Greek epic into a Roman epic, now the Roman Empire has fallen. And more than 1,000 years later, in 1320 whatever, when Dante wrote his Divine Comedy, he wrote his version for the Italians. Of course, it wasn't exactly a national epic, but he was writing it, but that is eventually what it became. And it was written in the vulgar Italian tongue rather than the traditional and sophisticated Latin tongue. And so suddenly we do have an unofficial sequel or major influence from this book. And now we move from Virgil to Dante. So in the next video, I'm going to be talking about perhaps one of my favorite pieces of literature, which is the Divine Comedy. But anyway, that pretty much wraps up the Aenied. And good book. Not great, but very interesting to see this little thread that we're following. Anyway, as always, keep reading. Thanks.